getting Elevate to where we are today and with the speakers that are here.
Martha Stewart, everyone. Former First Lady of the United States.
Commander Chris Hadfield.
ACON.
Mr. Bill Morneau.
Join us in uniting the world's innovators to solve society's greatest challenges.
Bad times usually create great companies.
You can either help this issue around income inequality, or you can bulletproof your Tesla.
Welcome everyone to episode 6 of Elevate Live. My name is Razor Suleiman and I am the host of your show today. We have a very special guest in Mark Cuban today. He's going to be joining us live. Mark and I are going to chat about leadership in difficult times. We're going to chat about why it's good to be good to your employees and Mark's thoughts on the future of sports. We're then going to go to our thousands of viewers and our live audience today, and you can ask Mark anything. He's going to do an AMA after our conversation, and you can ask him whatever's on your mind. Go into the Zoom browser to submit a question, and we're going to be going to the 3 most upvoted questions directly to Mark. We also have a special guest Zoom bombing us today with our first question. Next week, we've got an old friend of mine, Brian Halligan. He's the co-founder and CEO of HubSpot. They are the leaders in inbound marketing. Brian's going to chat with us around demand gen in a crisis and how you should be messaging your customers and prospects. And now I have the great privilege of introducing our guest on today's show, the legendary entrepreneur, Mark Cuban. In 1990, Mark sold his very first company, Micro Solutions, for $6 million. He then went on to found broadcast.com, which he sold in 1999 to Yahoo. For you ready for this? For $5.7 billion US. That's like $20 billion in Canadian dollars in today. Mark is the proud owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He has such an incredible story of how he turned this fledgling team into one of the most valuable sports franchises in the world today. He's a self-made billionaire, family man, entrepreneur, investor. He's invested in 150 companies. And, you know, in his spare time, he's the star of the hit reality TV show Shark Tank. But let me tell you what I love most about Mark Cuban. I love his humble beginnings. I love that at age 12, he was going door to door selling garbage bags to start his career. What I also love most is how candid he is about failures and the challenges that he's had in his career. I know when I talk to founders, the advice that I appreciate the most, the insight that I value the most, is when they tell me about their failures. You know, anybody can brag about their successes, but all the lessons are learned in those difficult times. And that's why we wanted to hear from Mark Cuban today. Mark Cuban, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Razor.
Where are you calling in from? Where are you zooming in
Dallas.
from?
I'm
Nice.
at home in Dallas.
Nice. Let's start off with you personally. How are you doing personally and professionally? How's COVID impacted you and your family?
I mean, like everybody else, it's Groundhog Day. You know, for the first couple of weeks, my wife and I were in control of our 3 kids who are 10, 13, and 16, a little boy and 2 girls. But day 15, the inmates took over the asylum. And so they're pretty much running the show now. And we're just trying to keep everybody's spirits up and try to make the best of it like everybody else, you know?
Mark, when
But
we were
health-wise, we're good.
chatting, it's good to hear. You know, when we were chatting over email about getting you on the show, and I told my wife that you were coming on. She texted me a photo of your family. He's like, he looks like he has such a wonderful family. Look how well behaved his kids look from the photo.
Yeah, photos can lie, right?
Mark, let's talk about leadership today. Let's talk about tech leaders specifically. Who's doing a great job? Who is really leading from the front, you know, really inspiring as a leader to follow? And then who on the other end is really messing this up? Who's sort of tripping over their own shoestrings?
I think Mark Benioff at Salesforce is doing a good job. I mean, he's got a view into millions of companies and how they're doing, and he understands, who's feeling the pain and why. And he's really come out and said, you know what, I'm going to try to have an impact. I'm going to deal with supporting hospitals and frontline workers and getting PPE. And, we've worked together some in an organization called Project N95 and some ancillary organizations that have worked to do that. He's out front trying to inspire kids that, even though this is a little bit crazy, this may be the year you're graduating, you may find yourself in college with all these uncertainties, this is why good companies can be started during these uncertain times. Mark has got a great heart. He's got a great mind. And I think he's really trying to lead by example. And that's all you can do. And in terms of companies who aren't doing it well, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, because when there's so much imperfect information, we really don't know, all the details of this virus. We don't know what's coming next. And when you have imperfect information, you make imperfect decisions. And so, I don't want to be, holier than thou and throw anybody under the bus.
Very diplomatic. Sounds like a future presidential candidate, possibly.
No, typically I'm not diplomatic at all, but it's just real, right? It's really hard right now, no matter what size business you are, to try to figure out how to make the right decisions in general for your companies.
Yeah, totally. Listen, we love Mark Benioff from when he started that company. Mark Benioff is a social innovator that just happens to run a really valuable tech company. And he's been using that platform for 20 plus years to really drive social change. So we're super proud that he and Salesforce are partners of Elevate. He's clearly crushing it and continues to inspire all of us.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mark.
Yeah, let's talk about what you did a little bit local to home. We were super impressed, after hearing that the NBA season was suspended, obviously the right decision. You immediately took care of your team, and specifically not the ones on the court, but the ones off the court. The arena workers that are really, relying on that hourly wage for games to be played. And you said that you're going to get them paid regardless if a game gets played or not. Talk to me about that decision. That was really bold.
It really wasn't bold. Going into our last game when the season was canceled, we knew obviously there was a lot of uncertainty. And so we had already started taking the steps to try to protect our hourly workers and all of our Mavericks employees for that matter, making sure that we were going to let everybody know that for the regular employees, the full-time employees, that they would continue to be paid. We weren't going to lay off or furlough anybody or fire anybody. And for the hourly workers who had the most uncertainty, we wanted to let them know that we would pay them as if all of our games were being played. Now, the good news is, we did that. The bad news is, that only took them through, I forget exactly how many games, 8 or 9, 10 games that would have been home games. So now we're working with them to try to find them other ways of making money and other opportunities because, there's other things that they would have been able to do that they're not able to do. So we're trying to find new ways to help them.
No, that's great to hear. We know that over the last 11 years, there's been a war for talent, right? Tech companies are growing and getting great talent is the biggest challenge. And now with COVID, with, unemployment getting to 15%, we're seeing some of them take a little bit of their foot off the gas, but you have a different vision. You think now more than ever, companies need to be focusing on the well-being of their employees. What is your sort of thoughts to other tech leaders as they're navigating how to preserve their culture and do right by their employees?
Well, for all companies, not just tech companies, how you treat your companies during this pandemic is going to define your brand for decades. Right now, consumers are so socially conscious, particularly Gen Zs and millennials. They define themselves, they brand themselves every time they use social media. And if you're a company that's not treating employees or stakeholders of any type well, your consumers are not going to want to associate themselves with you and how they present themselves on social media. They're not going to want to consume your products or services. And you're going to find yourself in a very difficult business position. And so you really have to put customers and stakeholders first now. Historically, you could get away with, all right, what can I do for my bottom line? And you can give the old tired story. It's shareholders first. I have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize my earnings and my return to a shareholder. And that's just not the case. That's very short-term thinking. You really have got to look and see and say, what can I do for my employees? Because I really need to retain them. If my employees don't feel secure in their jobs, how are they going to be able to do their jobs well? And if I don't pay them a living wage, then this is the thing that really bothers me, I think, as much as anything. I'll use my own company as an example. A few years back, somebody just brought up the issue with Walmart, I think it was, saying that they had X percentage of their employees that were receiving government assistance. To me, having a corporation subsidized by the government would be the worst thing possible to my psyche, right? That's the ultimate socialism, and that goes against everything I try to stand for. So I tried to go through as best I could, because not everybody's going to be forthcoming, and ask, is anybody getting government assistance? And we went through and raised our wages across the board to make sure that nobody qualified. And so, right now, not only do you have to try to keep as many people on payroll, not only do you need to try to really take care of your employees and stakeholders, but you also really have to make sure, if you can afford it at all, paying them a living wage. So, we don't put the additional burden on society, and you're not using government and taxpayer monies to subsidize your company.
Yeah, no, I agree that companies definitely have a responsibility to make sure that all of their stakeholders, their employees, their customers, and their shareholders, starting with employees, are taken care of, right? That's really how you build a really great business. We talk to a lot of founders, and I've been very blessed to have gotten great advice. I'd say founder to founder is really where I get the most amount of value, things that often don't get shared publicly. You have 150 portfolio companies. You work with a lot of really great founders. What is the advice you're giving to them that you're telling them, behind closed doors, or maybe that is not sort of commonly, like what do they need to be hearing from you and your experience that you have?
First thing is communicate. Everybody's feeling the stress and the anxiety of what's going on. So you have to be proactive in calling, talking to your employees, talking to your customers, talking to your vendors, and just opening that chain or that line of communications so that people can just talk, and then you have to be transparent. Everybody knows that every company, for the most part, is suffering, that employees are concerned about the future of their jobs, that vendors want to know whether or not you're going to be able to buy more and they can sell you more, and you want to know whether or not your customers are going to continue to buy from you. And so having that open dialogue is critical. But most importantly, you have to be candid, you have to be transparent, you have to be authentic, because you can't spin what's going on. You can't pretend and say, oh, it'll be okay, and it'll be just like it was when we get no, things are going to change. But with that change comes opportunity. And I think one unique thing that I've really tried to push to all my portfolio companies is to talk to the people that are closest to your customers. And those typically are your frontline employees. They're the ones that are calling their customers and saying, how are you doing? How are things changing in your world? Where do you see things going? Because when you open that line of communication, all it takes is one good idea. We're transitioning. In a lot of respects, we're going through a complete reset of business. The old rules in so many places are not going to apply. And you have to ask yourself where the best idea is going to come from. Historically, I'd always think, I'm going to come up with the best idea. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to come up with something that really sets the stage for what's going to happen next. But no one's been through anything like this. And, even all the experiences I've had in all the different businesses I've started, run, sold, bought, invested in, those histories help some, but not a lot. And so communicating with your frontline employees and asking them, what ideas do you have? What do you think is going to change? What are our customers telling us? Because in that communication, all it takes is one good idea, and that gives you a huge competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen, a lot of that really resonates with us at home. We were building the South by Southwest for our generation, and then all of a sudden live events became illegal, right? You couldn't gather 30,000 people anymore. And so I remember sitting down with the team and being authentic and increasing our communication. And I'd say even being vulnerable and telling them, you don't know how this is going to go and where the next
That's exactly right.
revenue is going to come from, and trying to make them be a part of the solution. And we launched an internal elevator pitch around revenue generation, like how do we pivot, stay relevant, add value. And there was so amazing, so many wonderful ideas right from our team, including Elevate Main Stage live stream. This was an employee innovation that we did exactly what you talked about.
You never, and that's the beauty of business. It doesn't matter where the next idea comes from, right? And when we go forward, there's going to be 50 companies, 20 years from now, we'll look back to this and there'll have been 5, 10, 25, 50 world-class companies that were created during this pandemic that changed the game, and most of those ideas probably will come from somebody who's broke, someone who was a frontline worker, and who everybody thought was crazy, and the idea made no sense. And then we'll look back and say, you know what, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah. We were, chatting with Brian Chesky who people thought were crazy when he started Airbnb in the last recession, right? So many great companies came out of that period of time, but there was a necessity for people to earn extra income through maybe sharing or renting out a room in their home. Airbnb was born out of a recession. Uber, we at my old company Achievers, we shared office space with Travis and Garrick at Uber, and same thing. You couldn't get reliable transportation. Uber was born out of recession. Closer to home, Shopify, while started before then, really took off when they enabled entrepreneurs to start their own companies right from their living rooms. So couldn't agree more. Some great game-changing companies started in the last economic recession. Mark, tell us why you think now is the best time ever to start a company.
Because we're going through a complete reset. The big legacy companies are trying to protect their legacy businesses. They're trying to hold on. It's very difficult for them to be agile. Medium-sized companies and even small businesses, the same thing. Everybody's trying to figure out how to survive. And when you're doing that, you tend to go back to what got you there and what you're most confident and comfortable with, as opposed to really being agile and pushing forward and innovating. And so if you have an innovative idea, there's no better time. In the history of business, there's never been a better time to start a company than right this minute. And so all of you that got that one idea, that one thought, you've got time to work on it now, most likely, and you've got the opportunity where, there aren't others that are really, being as entrepreneurial as you can. And so you just got to ask yourself the question, why not me? Why not now? Now's the time to go for it. I've started my best companies when I've had nothing to lose. And, there's so much disappointment and there's so much heartache right now that people don't have a lot to lose. And that's the best time to always start a company.
Let's change gears for a second. We've seen Elon Musk being super active on Twitter. A few weeks ago, he shared a tweet saying that Tesla was overvalued, and overnight, $14 billion of market cap was vanished from that one tweet. Since going into lockdown, he's been pretty aggressive around, locally, he's been not able to go back to work, saying that his civil liberties have been encroached, threatening to move Tesla's headquarters from California to your backyard in Texas. Talk to me about what you think about all this. What's the right way to reopen up the economy?
Two different questions there. One, I love Elon. He's doing everything he can to be John Galt, right? You can't stop me. I'm going out there and I'm opening up and I've got the better solution, and I give him tons of credit for that. Now, in terms of opening up the economy, that's a completely different question. And the challenge now isn't liquidity. The Fed put enough money in. It's not borrowing power. Companies can borrow in most cases, particularly bigger companies. But the real challenge is consumer demand. 2/3 of the American economy is consumer demand. And that's what's fallen off a cliff, particularly for any business that doesn't sell online. And so the question becomes, how do we juice up consumer demand and do that in an environment where people are not confident that they're going to keep their jobs? What we're seeing is, and I've got some companies that give us a good layout of where money's being spent. People are buying things that they need for their home. They're buying things to continue to work from home, but they're buying them all online, and they're not buying superfluous things. They're not buying things that just make them happy. They're really sticking to the standard items. And that's what happens when people aren't confident that they'll keep their jobs. And the only way, in my opinion, that will start to change that path is through, let's call it a transitional federal jobs programs here in the United States and maybe even in Canada and other places around the world. And, if you look at jobs programs historically, where they've been implemented to do jobs that provide productive, that enable productivity, then good things have happened. So I'm not talking about jobs where people dig a hole and then fill a hole. But if you look at what's happening now in the country, in the United States, we're seeing a specific need for tracking and tracing. Yet we have nobody trained to do that. You have states trying to do the same thing and hire people and train them to do tracking and tracing. But the problem is each state is doing it their own way. And in some cases, municipalities are doing it their own way. And that silos the data. And there's no one centralized place for all that data to be aggregated. And that's the whole purpose of tracking and tracing. And so if the federal government would say, okay, let's hire the 2 or 3 or maybe 4 million people that we need and train them as healthcare workers with HIPAA compliance and privacy constraints, all those things that are needed to be trained in, and let them go out there and do tracking and tracing, that's a productive job that you can pay them, $30,000 a year plus benefits. That's a job that has confidence, so that increases consumer demands. You can extend that to so many other areas. You can extend it into infrastructure. You can extend it into taking care of people with pre-existing conditions or the elderly who are afraid to go out now because of the virus, that need help, that need support. There's so many places, and we have the facilities in the United States to do it. We have the Peace Corps, we have AmeriCorps. So there's organizations that we could drive this through. But if we don't do it and we just leave it to the way we've done it historically, which is hoping that companies are started and there's enough liquidity that they have money to start businesses, that's not going to work, because we've never seen a situation like this where in the United States, in a period of just a little bit more than 2 months, we have 50 million people who are unemployed or underemployed. The traditional way of starting businesses and having them absorb people into their companies and growing from there can't respond fast enough. The only organization who can is the government and the federal government for that. And so that's what needs to happen. That's the only way you're going to start building consumer demand. And we need to do that now.
Got it. Let's go back a little bit to earlier this year, sort of a pre-COVID.
So wait, is that got it and agree or disagree, Razor?
Oh, no. Listen to me. I couldn't agree more. I want to make sure I get to our Q&A, but I couldn't agree more. I think consumer demand, and we're going to talk a little bit about some ideas we have when we get to our Q&A around supporting local,
cool.
Because you're right, too much of the economy is driven by our consumers feeling confident that they've got the jobs to then be able to spend, right? I couldn't agree more. We're going to get back to that though, okay? Let's talk about earlier this year. So the theme at Davos this year was sustainability. BlackRock CEO, the world's largest asset manager, Larry Flint, said that BlackRock is committed to investing in companies that are doing social good, impacting the environment, impacting climate change, which was a huge statement for someone who leads, again, the world's largest asset company. Talk to me about the concept of stakeholder capitalism. It's been gaining momentum. How should companies be thinking about, whether it's starting a new company or big corporates, around how social impact should be woven into the DNA of their companies in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I mean, look, I use Shark Tank as a reference. Any company started by a millennial or Gen Z that comes on Shark Tank always has a social component. I've got a company, Combat Flip-Flops. When you buy a pair of flip-flops from them, they'll put aside money to build schools for girls in Afghanistan. There's other companies that do comparable things, whether it's for education or supporting the environment, whatever it is. And so consumers, particularly younger consumers today, when they're looking to make a purchase, they want to know that that brand aligns with their social interests. If you're into conservation, if the ecology is important to you, you're going to make a choice not to buy at the cheapest price or the most expensive. You're going to buy from somebody that reflects your social consciousness. So that's critically important for companies. If they don't do it, again, they're going to find that they're not going to be able to excel and reach their goals, because you're going to be youngest consumers, and it just won't work.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more around the social consciousness and the shared values that consumers want to see, that they see in themselves, emulate into the companies that they're going to support. And I think especially now, people are going to be more conscious with those limited consumer dollars and making sure that there's good alignment around values.
Exactly right. I mean, social media is going to drive that to no end, as I said before. You know, we all have our brand that we put on social media, even if it's only how we represent ourselves to our friends and family. And if you don't have the same level of social responsibility as the person that is trying to buy from you, they won't buy from you.
Okay, great. We're going to talk about the future of sports next. We're going to first go to our live audience. We've got thousands of guests joining us today. And so we're going to do a poll with our live audience. And I want them to make us some predictions around when they think big league sports will resume. I'm going to give them 30 seconds to vote, and we'll see what our audience thinks. But Mark, I'm going to go over to you. You know, 2020, the 2020 season, the NBA season clearly is in doubt. You know, it may look like the reigning hometown Toronto Raptors will continue to be world champions. Clearly, you're no stranger to champions, having helped the Mavs bring their first NBA title in franchise history.
Yep.
Talk to me about your thoughts on how big league sports are going to come back online.
Safety, 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 safety. Once we have the confidence that we can protect our players and the essential personnel required to put on a game, if only for television, playing without fans, then we'll be able to do it. My guess is, and this isn't any announcement from the NBA, my guess is we'll come to one or two quarantine locations and take the Hotel California approach. You know, the old song from the Eagles, you can enter, but you can't leave. So we'll test people that come in and we'll keep them in that environment until either the season's over or they're eliminated from the playoffs, and then we'll go from there. But I think, you know, my hope is that we'll be able to play out some of the 2020 regular season and then have our playoffs at some point. I can't give you a date, but I'm confident that we can do it.
Awesome. How do you think, are you in touch with sort of other big league sports? We've seen South Korea, you know, bring back baseball and have issues with infection rates there, even Germany with their soccer league. Talk to me about how you're thinking about this globally or other sports leagues in terms of best practices.
Well, I mean, yeah, we'll learn from what everybody else does. The NBA obviously has communications with all those leagues, talking to their medical staff, talking to the scientists, and, you know, looking at the procedures that are in place, looking to see what worked and what doesn't work, and we'll learn from it. We don't have to rush it. I think, you know, even though there's a little bit of a sense of urgency because people in Canada and in America, we love our sports. We want our sports. We want to see the NBA being played again. But, you know, if we push our season back to, say, December 25th, which, you know, is most likely what I would like to see anyways, that gives us time to say, okay, we don't have to return until July or even August, and we can still get the rest of the season in.
Got it. Let's go to the poll from our audience. It seems like we're going to publish the result. It seems like we have a number of optimists. The most popular answer was sort of 3 to 6 months, so sort of aligned with your time frame. About a half the audience thought, or hoped at least, that they're going to come back online. No, we can't wait to get back and just get a little distracted. Okay, we are going to go to our Q&A. We've got a ton of questions coming in through Zoom, but first we're going to go to our special guests. We have Garrick Tiplady, the Managing Director of Facebook and Instagram in Canada. Garrick's a founding partner of Elevate, good friend. Garrick, over to you. First question to Mark.
Razor, thank you for having me. Mark, thanks for being on. Really appreciate it. I think before jumping into a question, I just wanted to say I couldn't agree more with your point on the importance of taking care of employees. I think we're actually in a spot where we're seeing companies with strong cultures will actually become stronger through this. And I think in an odd way, as we think around COVID, it's humanizing all of us. And I just hope as a culture, as executives, we maintain that whenever we get to whatever this new normal is going to look like. Now, my question 100%. Relates to, so my question is this, you know, as it relates to businesses showing up for their customers and their communities, we've seen unbelievable responses from multiple brands. And I know we just talked about stakeholder value. I fully agree with your comments on new companies really aligning with social values. For established companies, I think we're starting to see that. And so my question is really twofold. One, do you think that's the tipping point, and COVID is the tipping point, or do you think we're just seeing a short-term reaction to a major disruption across the industry? And then the second piece is, as we start to think about reemergence, should we be thinking more broadly about how we can collectively come together across industry to support local and small business?
Okay, first question, I think we're seeing an acceleration of what needs to happen. I don't know that it's a complete tipping point because, as you know, Garrett, companies are going to try to go back to work for them before. They're going to go back to where their comfort zone was. And a lot of CEOs will take that approach. But I think that the groundswell of smaller, more agile, more resilient, newer companies will accelerate that time, that critical path to getting us to being more compassionate, a more compassionate version of capitalism. So I don't think that there'll be an abrupt switch that turns on and all of a sudden all companies are compassionate, but I think we'll see a significant acceleration. And as you mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, those companies that are compassionate will excel far beyond those who won't. And that will lead us to accelerate us in that better direction. In terms of supporting and helping small businesses, we're really just we have to try to platform them to enable them to have the confidence just to try. I don't think companies, a small business can come from anywhere. It doesn't need a lot of investment. I'm always a big believer that sweat equity is the best equity. And now, particularly in a technological world, it's not hard to start. If you have a laptop, if you have a connection, if you're able to get on social media like Facebook to communicate, you can really create a business and accelerate it. Sell it from Shopify, promote and discuss and connect on Facebook and other platforms. And so anybody can start out of the bedroom of their house. And where that's particularly important now, where I think there is an inflection point in tech. Historically, we've started as an agrarian economy, and then we became an industrial manufacturing economy. Then we became kind of a hybrid digital analog economy. Now that hybrid is evolving to almost full digital. And you see that, and it's really interesting, and I don't know how it plays out specifically, but look at Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, tech companies that are considered high-end tech companies that have physical components to them where you need human intervention or human involvement. They're the ones that have struggled for obvious reasons. The question becomes, how can you take that out of the mix? Is there a better way to do Airbnb, sharing of locations? What's going to happen with office space? What's going to happen with transportation? Is this the opportunity to introduce autonomous driving because there's so much less traffic on the road and people aren't going to trust a human driver in the car with them? So we're going to have these transitional opportunities where I think we evolve to an all digital, where possible, economy. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. I'm not saying, the minute we have a vaccine for COVID, this all gets solved. But over the next 10 years, I think that's where we'll see a push. And that's where there's opportunities for small businesses to create those solutions, because you'll have less human intervention than we did in the past in digital solutions, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Sounds great. Actually, Garrick, I'm going to talk a little bit about an initiative that you are leading the charge in partnership with Elevate around helping small businesses become more digital. Mark, it was a great segue. We've secured the biggest companies in Canada, from the banks, the telcos, the tech companies, all to get to collaborate together to create something to the scale of a Black Friday or Cyber Monday, but really in the support of local communities, local businesses, and really trying to get them to become omni-channel, right? Getting them to, utilize their storefronts, but also having a Shopify store, also selling on, some of the tech platforms. Garrett, talk to me a little bit about what you and the other leaders are working on.
Yeah, so the idea is fairly straightforward, which is, can we create a catalytic moment where we actually start to think about re-engaging with communities, re-engaging with local businesses. And it really cuts across almost every industry as we sort of think about it. And the idea is, Mark, as you had mentioned before, consumer spending is down. I don't think we are going to change that, but I think what we can do is create a movement, a moment in time where we do have the scale, where we can get people out engaging again. And whether that's shopping for an item or buying a gift card to support businesses, really in the hopes of maintaining cash flow for those businesses that need it most right now, but also trying to re-stimulate some of that consumer spend across the industry.
Yeah, guys, if I can just add to that, I think it's brilliant. And I think, teaching companies that have been primarily analog with just marginal online opportunities, how do you implement Shopify to its fullest? How do you implement Facebook to really help you drive demand? How do you take your business from being primarily analog and recognizing that people are starting to increase their preference to buying only, if not exclusively, online, knowing you're going to have to compete with bigger organizations like Amazon? Helping small businesses do that is going to be critical right now. So congratulations. I think it's a great idea.
Awesome, Mark. Listen, look, we're leading the charge here in Canada. We'd love to make this a North American initiative. Is this something you want to lend your name to and help us drive this and make this a North American campaign?
Yeah, send me information. I'm happy to dig in and take a look. I mean, anything we can do to help mom and pop shops really understand what it takes to convert to online now particularly is more important than ever. Because you're seeing every bit of data that we're seeing is that people are accelerating their commitment to full-time purchases online, that they're avoiding shopping unless they have to. And even though that won't stay 100% the case after this, I think it's a trend that will accelerate over time. And if small companies don't get ahead of it, and if we can't invent ways for communities to really grow, you're going to have the same impact. You're going to see the same negative impact that we saw from Walmart coming into communities where the small mom and pops couldn't compete with Walmart. So it's best to get ahead of it. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Awesome. Garrick, thank you so much for joining us. Our next question, we're going to go to Zoom. We've got Jack C. from Port Hope asking, Mark, your advice for recent college grads. They're all graduating. They're going through a really difficult time. No prom, no graduation. How should they be thinking about entering the job market? Where are those biggest opportunities?
Well, I can tell you from experience, when I graduated, and I won't give the years, too long ago, but the last time the unemployment rate in Canada and in the United States was over 10% was the year I graduated. And so when I was coming out, it was tough. I mean, so the number one thing is you have to be mobile. You can't just expect, like you might have in the past, say, I'll be able to find a job where I live now. It's going to be more difficult. So you have to be mobile. The second part is you have to be agile. You have to be able to say, I'm not going to maybe get the perfect job, but in this day and age, kids don't look for careers when they graduate from college. Everybody's like the NBA. Everybody's a free agent. And so you don't have to find the best job. You just have to find a job so that you can pay your bills. And what I learned as much from the jobs I got fired from or I quit because I didn't like them as the jobs that I loved. And so getting out and taking that first job where you can pay your bills, it may not be perfect, but I assure you, you'll make great friends for life and you'll learn a lot. And the third part, really, I would tell you the number one job interview question that you're going to get, that you have to have an answer for, is what did you do and what did you learn during the pandemic of 2020? Now, if all you do is say, my Fortnite game went through the roof, I went from 2 kills to 8 kills, and, I always won, or, I think I have a chance, I worked really hard, I want to try to make it into the Overwatch League. That might work in some companies, but the majority, it's not going to give you an edge. So you really have to use this time to try to increase your skill set and your preparation for wherever the job opportunities take you.
Got it. No, definitely a difficult time, but trying to differentiate, add value, get your start, sort of build up, and not your Fortnite activity, but just adding value to society, I think is good advice. We're going to go to Zamir next. Zamir, Mark wants to know how can we infuse more empathy and compassion into the business world?
Well, first, wherever you work, do it yourself. Lead by example. Because people like to be around people who are nice, people who are compassionate, people who are understanding. Customers like to do business with them. And second, only buy from companies that present your ideals, that stand for the same things you do, and encourage your friends to do the same thing. And when you do buy from a company and you like their product or service and you like how they represent your ideals, promote it on social media. Let other people know, because that network effect is what allows the economy to change, what allows those businesses to grow. And so you can have as much of an impact in your life on this change as I could or anybody else could.
Well, that sounds great. We're going to go to Andrew D. from Toronto. He wants to get some investing advice. We're seeing sort of almost a disconnect. The markets are maybe down 10% since the highs of the year, but unemployment is 15 and increasing. Are the markets sort of reflecting the reality of the economy? What's your advice around how to best invest in a time that we're going through now?
So two things there. One, is the market reflecting reality? No, it rarely does. It reflects supply and demand, which is driven by the liquidity. And the Fed, and the central banks just keep on pumping money into the system, and that inflates asset values. And so that's why you see the market where it is. But that doesn't mean it'll stay there in the short term. So it really comes down to the second part of the answer is, what's your horizon for investing? If you're in your 20s and this is meant to be, something to be there for your retirement 30, 40 years later, then it's okay to dollar cost average and start buying. Typically what I recommend is inexpensive, like a Vanguard SPX, Standard & Poor's mutual fund, that each and every month you put some into. And so if the market goes up, you benefit, and you keep on buying as it goes up, and your net worth is increasing. If the market goes down, well, at some point, I'm confident, whether it's 3, 5, 10 years from now, the market will be much higher than it is today. So even if you're buying, even if it's going down, over the long term, you'll make even more money. So I think people kind of get confused that sometimes, as long as you're a long-term thinker and a long-term investor, when the market goes down and you continue to buy by dollar cost averaging down, as long as you believe the market will increase long-term, as I do, as Warren Buffett does, as most investors do, then you have more opportunity to make more money in the long term. So don't be afraid of buying more as the market goes down, and don't be afraid to buy more as the market goes up.
Yeah, you referenced legendary investor Warren Buffett. I remember about a decade ago, he had bet a hotshot New York hedge fund manager around his strategy of picking one stock, holding it for 10 years. He bet $1 million. The money was going to charity to see if that one stock could outperform, the most sophisticated hedge fund managers in New York. He bet on Vanguard's index fund, and 10 years later, from 2008 to 2018, he had outperformed, again, the best hedge fund managers by about 63%. So a proven strategy, good times, bad times, sound advice. Thank you. We're going to go to Tanya K from Vancouver. Tanya wants to know who you are looking for. Who do you get inspiration from these days? Who do you look to listen to?
My kids. My kids are 10, 13, and 16, and they're resilient. They're loving. They just, how they're responding to all this and still wanting to learn, still be excited about life and school. That's where I get my inspiration, because as a parent, that's what I worry about. What's this world going to be like for them? And I see them every day and get inspired and excited about them every day. So that's where I get my inspiration.
I love it, Mark. You could literally see yourself lighting up as you talk about your kids. And I think all of us have got the chance to spend more time with their kids. I know we have at home, and it's just such a joy to be around them and see how they view the world and just spend quality time with them. So great advice. Okay, so that is all the time that we have today on Elevate Live. Thank you so much for those of you at home, and especially Mark for joining us. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me. And for those of you who really want to see us in action, follow me on all my social media, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok at mcuban. You'll get to see my dance moves.
I love it. We've been promoting all of your social channels throughout the show. And Mark, we have a special gift for you. We have planted, Elevate and our partners Trees Canada have planted the Mark Cuban forest. You have a forest up here with your name on it in Canada, right? Once we beat this COVID, we have a climate crisis. So know that you're doing your part for the climate.
I really, really appreciate that. I try to do the same thing. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And Razor, please be in touch for the other program that Elevate's doing in the community to build business. I'd love to hear more.
We definitely will. Mark, you get to nominate 2 future guests on Elevate Live, people that you think are doing amazing work. Who would be your 2 people that you'd love to see on the show next?
Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank. I think she'd be amazing because she takes a totally different perspective on business and people, and she has great insights on people. And then the second, maybe somebody like Kyle Bass, who's a contrarian, right? Who's really a big-time investor across the world and has some unique insights on the global economy and what's happening there. He's definitely a contrarian, and I think that helps to hear from sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Those just make for the great interviews and some great tweets. So thank you for the suggestions. Yep. Appreciate it. Next week, we have Brian Halligan, co-founder, CEO of HubSpot, leader in demand gen inbound marketing. Join us next week on May 20th, Wednesday. It's actually my birthday. Noon, we will be doing a special edition of Elevate Live with Brian. Special thanks to our team. Our executive producer of the show today is Lisa Zarzechny. Thank you so much. And for the financial support of our founding partners, we wouldn't be able to do what we do at Elevate had we not had the support and continued support, particularly during these difficult times. And for those of you at home, stay healthy, stay safe, and let's take care of each other. Thanks so much. My name is Razor, and I'll see you next week.